Okay.
There we go.
The meeting is being recorded. Okay. I think Mark and I always have the opinion that when it's called for a certain time, we don't want to penalize
You're
all
right.
those who did
Yes.
come and those who came late. So we want to make sure that they miss out on some good stuff. So next time they'll make sure to tune in right away.
Right. So if
Okay.
we,
So
you,
if it's in your agreement, if you both
yeah,
agree.
absolutely. We have 26, so we've got a few more, but they'll come in as and when they come in. Yeah,
So
no problem.
Janet, did you want to say anything before?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I just want to say hi to everybody. Welcome to our AACI Zoom lecture on from the Financial Resource Network. And it's called Ensuring Your Financial Security and Wishes in Israel. And I thank you all for joining us. And some more will be joining us on the way. I just want to pass you over to Yitzchak Hutner, who will explain the proceedings. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very, very good. I also just want to check, I see that Yanina is here. Just wanted to make sure, is Martin also here?
Yep, I'm here.
Yes.
Okay, good, okay. And Mark, I saw you before and I don't see you.
Okay.
Okay, you don't have to, okay, but.
The slide is on the screen already, so I guess they didn't want to see me.
So first of all, Janet and AACI, thank you so much. Amazing working with what an amazing association, the Americans and Canadians in Israel. So thank you very much, first of all. Just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Yitzchak Hutner, and I'm going to be moderating again this particular seminar. I am an independent financial advisor, and I also am currently working as an international investment client advocate with Capital Markets IQ. I'm a former Canadian, or I guess once a Canadian, always a Canadian, I guess. Graduated from McGill and have a graduate degree from Yeshiva University. We made Aliyah close to 30 years ago. And one of my areas of specialty is really alternative investing, which we can talk about some other time. And I'll also be the one that will be answering any of your questions, and I'll be fielding your questions, which I'll explain in a minute. And I'll also be the one that after the seminar in the next couple of weeks, that I'll be able to be in touch with each one to be able to discuss perhaps some of your specific questions that you may not feel comfortable asking your questions on in a bigger forum like this. So we'll be able to follow up together, and you'll have my email we already have a few questions that came in even before the session. So hopefully we'll get to everything. So again, thank you to the AACI and Leah Rosenzweig for giving the technical assistance for tonight's seminar. Thank you very much. So tonight we're going to be structured, as you see, we're going to be going through many slides that Mark van Gelderen is going to do. We'll introduce him in a second. Going through all the different slides that we have tonight. So there's a lot of material to cover, and don't think we're going to cover every single thing. We'll just sort of whet your appetite in each of these different areas, whether it's legal, social, what have you. Mark will be talking about, and we'll highlight some of the good areas, some of the pitfalls that we need to be looking out for. And we're going to then follow with our two speakers. After that, we're going to open it up to your questions. What I'd appreciate you doing is using the chat below on the screen and send in your questions, and I'll field them, and then I'll make sure that we get them answered. Hopefully we'll have enough time to answer them all with our guests tonight. And if not, then we'll follow up with you after the session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, everybody knows, certainly Mark van Gelderen, who's been around dealing with financial things and consultation since 1992, is doing all these seminars and classes around the country. And without further ado, introduce Mark van Gelderen.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I see we already have a couple of questions that have come in. What we're trying to do is get you a lot of information very quickly here. There's 18 slides to go through, and hopefully we'll spend less than a minute on each, so there'll be plenty of time to answer your questions. Here on the first slide, the main thing I'm concerned about is making sure that you understand the disclaimers that we're not giving out legal advice, we're not giving out investment advice, tax advice, or anything else. We're just giving you basic information to the best of our knowledge. And if there's something that you think you want to move forward on, you should take professional advice, and we can help steer you to the right people. You'll be meeting several of them this evening, and then make an informed decision once you have all the facts. Okay, so let's go on to the second page. And here we're talking about powers of attorney. I'm going to start by talking about backgrounds, legal information. If you have questions about it, general questions, Martin, who is the lawyer, will be able to answer them later on. But right now, just trying to give you the information you need so that you understand how the system works in Israel. So can we go to the next page? The next page talks about powers of attorney. It's something that is very different in Israel than it is in most other English-speaking countries. Israel still follows the law that was here during mandatory times, which means that a power of attorney is only good while a person can make informed decisions. And one of those informed decisions that anyone who gives out a power of attorney has to be able to make is when to withdraw it. And if a person becomes incompetent for whatever reason, the power of attorneys in Israel automatically become null and void, and anyone who is operating as an attorney for someone is potentially in severe legal problems if they're acting as a power of attorney when a person is no longer able to make a decision, the person who gave out the power of attorney. Next one is apitropos kali. Let's go to the next page. And there, apitropos is a Greek term, and it's the office of the general guardian. Until about 5 years ago, the only legal mechanism that there was if a person became incapacitated and couldn't take care of themselves was that a legal and it's important to know that that still exists, and that is the default in the country whenever a person hasn't properly prepared. Let's go on to the next page. Next page is the continuing power of attorney slide. That's a law that came into being only about 5 years ago, and it works in many ways like a will. However, a will is not legal, doesn't come into effect until after a person is dead. So anything that's written in your will has no bearing legally before you die. And the kind of formulas that exist in North America and Europe in terms of taking care of people when they are no longer able to take care of themselves don't cross borders. So if you have a system that was set up in Canada or in England or wherever, that doesn't apply to Israel, because any place where there's a power of attorney, it's only within that jurisdiction or any other type of document like that. So in Israel, this law came into being in recent years, and it was done together with the ministries of justice of several other countries, the most important one being the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom now has a similar law on its books. It's designed so that you can do anything you want. You can have the same kinds of directions as you would put in the will, but this applies to from today forward until time of death. and it covers the health area, the quality of life, and the financial area. It's somewhat revolutionary, and as you'll note on the last point there, it even continues after death for up to 90 days, so that the people who have the powers to go and make decisions for you can clean up whatever mess is left over. The parameters of this continuing power of attorney in Israel are that it only can be done by an Israeli lawyer who has taken a course and been approved to do it. It is done pretty much online. It's paperless, and all the records are kept on the computers of the Ministry of Justice. However, anyone who's involved with it will get paper copies so that they know for themselves what their tasks are, and that they can go and show it at banks and hospitals and elsewhere to show that they have the rights to go and make these kinds of conditions. One of the questions that probably are in several people's minds is, if I want someone to go and make decisions about myself, can they be living abroad? If my children are abroad and I'm here alone, can my children be named in it and make decisions? The answer is yes. However, there is a problem, and it goes in all directions when you're crossing borders or even moving across a large geographic territory that's under the same legal setup, which is that if someone is incapacitated, very often somebody needs to sign off to go and approve care, to go and write a contract with a care home or whatever. And it's very hard to do that from abroad. You need to have someone who's close by, who might be working in coordination with the people abroad to go and make your wishes come to reality. Okay, let's go on to the next page, which is the rights of a dying patient. This is a separate law from everything else. It's not with the Ministry of Justice, it's with the Ministry of Health. And there's special laws here in Israel and procedures if a person is deemed to be within the last months of life. And because these laws were made at different times and so forth, there is some conflict between them in terms of whether one comes under the rights of a dying patient or under the continuing power of attorney or the apotropos. And that's something that can be discussed, but it's not for our seminar this evening. Okay, let's go on to the next slide.
Mark, that it says has less than 65 months left to live. That should be 6 months left to live.
6 months. I'm sorry.
No
Please correct that. Sorry. That was a major mistake there. Okay, let's correct that. There'll be several other things to correct here as well as we go along. Thank you. 6 months. Okay, hospital care. Hospital care in Israel works significantly differently than it does in many other countries. We're now on slide number 6. Okay, hospital care is socialized medicine. And socialized medicine means that there isn't enough money to pay for everything. If there was enough money to pay for everything, our taxes would be considerably higher. So as a result, you need to understand that certain things that we see common in hospitals elsewhere are not common here. And the main area is the area of nursing and nurturing. In general, when someone's in the hospital, it's important that a family member or a hired employee be there to go and take care of the minute by minute needs of the patient, because there isn't a nurse hovering around who has time to go and clean up messes and do things between their assigned duties that are medically related. Another important issue is that when you go to a hospital, there is not a direct connection with your Kupat Cholim, the clinic which you're going to, and it's up to the family member or a close friend to make sure that health histories and other information is passed on to the hospital so that they can make the proper decisions. The computer systems are not yet at the point where all this information is immediately available to anyone within the medical system. And it's also an issue of privacy. They don't want your records to be able to be seen by anybody in the country. A couple of other points. In this area and the following slides, Yanina is our resident expert, and she's going to be able to help you answer some questions about this, but particularly after the seminar today, she has lots of experience and lots of insight, and she knows more than anybody else I know about social services and medical care. I mentioned that we're living under a socialized medicine system, but what happens is that people come into a hospital setting or where there's extra care needed, and they sort of shut down on the way they would have thought if it was happening in Canada or the United States, where medical care costs so much more. So here, most everything that's going on at the hospital is costing you nothing. Don't be afraid to go and spend some money for some of the extras, including paying for private consultation with the medical experts at the hospital so that you have their attention and you understand what's going on. And finally, there's a special law in Israel called the Steinberg Law, which is if you're not happy with the way they're making medical decisions, there is an alternative open to you. And that's enshrined in law, and it's known as the Steinberg Law. And again, Yanina or others familiar with the system would be able to tell you more. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, number 7. Social care. In Israel, social services are much more part of the care process at the hospitals and elsewhere. Each hospital and each clinic from the health funds has social workers working for them. They're there to help ensure that there's more than just medical care going on, but there's follow-up in terms of therapies and so forth. And at the hospital, the social service department is in charge of helping you plan the post-hospital follow-up care, whether it's medical or it's other types of therapies. Okay, so the social work department is dealing with all the non-medical issues that need to be addressed as part of being in a hospital. Just so you understand the yin-yang, the push and pull between socialized medicine and taxes, you need to understand that some of the most important workers in the country are either in the medical setting or in the education setting. The 3 professions that are highly specialized but are paid poorest here are nurses, social workers, and teachers. And that's because people don't want to pay even higher taxes than what they're paying right now. Okay, let's go on to the next page, page number 8, the social service system. The social service system has as its shining center for many services, Bituach Leumi. And it covers many things other than the two that are listed on the slide here. However, the social service system is mainly run by social workers. And as Yanina will tell you later, if you don't know how to negotiate the system, they're going to let you down because they're overworked and underpaid. There are some alternatives that we're going to talk about. Okay, let's go to page number 9. In theory, the social welfare system is centered around Misrad HaRevacha. That's the welfare ministry. Misrad HaRevacha, and their field agents are the municipal social service department. Every municipality, whether it's a city or a regional council, has a social service department. And once a person is listed as needing help, a TEEK is open, a file is open for them, and the local social service department is the one who's supposed to operate. But as I said, they're underpaid and overworked. And particularly if you don't have a good command of Hebrew, you may have trouble finding someone who speaks your language. And that is why having contacts at the AACI and people like Yanina is so critical for being successful when we're living here. Okay, let's go on to number 10. Yad Sarah and other Amutum. The number on this slide, I think, is amazing. For a little country with only 9 million people, there are 4,000 or more health-related nonprofits or charities, gemachim. So what's important is to find out for your area through the local social service department, with the help of the AACI and others, which public organizations, nonprofits, may be around to help you. There are just amazing things. Yad Sarah is not the only one that lends out material, hospital beds, etc. There are others, and some are even better than them. It's important to know what's going on. Now, the last two things are extremely important if you're dealing in the healthcare issue area, and that is the Shira Pransky Project, which is under the auspices of the AACI, and they have tried to translate to English as many documents as possible from Hebrew that are health related. You just can go to their website and you can get lots of information. And here on the slide is the telephone numbers for the Tel Aviv and Jerusalem offices. Somehow there's a mistake there with the Jerusalem number. It's the first 0 should be crossed out and added beyond the 90. So 0256000900. Okay, let's go on to page 11. One of the questions that always comes up and is important to know is what's the story with wills and trusts? Wills can be done in Israel. They can be brought in from abroad. They're legal here. They can be in any language. However, wills should be updated. If you have a will from Australia and you've been here for 10 years, that will, even so it's legal here, is probably not going to be appropriate anymore because your life has changed significantly. So it's important to have a will done, and there are lawyers associated with the AACI, Martin Fetter, whom you're going to meet in a few minutes, who can help you with that, and they're not terribly expensive, plus they know what are the latest legal tax and other issues that are going on here in Israel. Many people won't need a will because there just isn't that much to give away. And the way the state has a default will, as all countries have, may be all you need. Finally, trusts in Israel have become problematic in the same way as for Americans, taxation worldwide is problematic. And even if you are named in a trust that will only come into existence after someone passes away, it is extremely important that you have it reviewed, if possible, by someone in Israel, because the difference can be tremendous in terms of taxation for the entire trust, just because there's one Israeli beneficiary of the trust. Okay, so many people say, don't worry, no one will find out about it. However, today, because of the documentation that has to be done when money crosses borders into Israel, it is no longer hard for Israel to figure out what's going on. Okay, let's go on to page 12. This is something that we deal with a lot, and Yanina pretty much insisted that we talk about it in this seminar. What happens when you're no longer able to easily make decisions and as a person passes away? You need to have documents somewhat organized and in clearly defined places, and that there's a way to find passwords, and that you have a plan as to what's going on, particularly if you have the continuing power of attorney in place. You'll want that the people involved will be able to get to your passwords, know what's going on. There should be a short directory put together so that they know what's what and where to find it. These are things that people tend to procrastinate on. Everyone would like to live in a Cinderella world where we live happily ever after. But the truth is that things do deteriorate over time. A final idea is a family council. Many families are intact enough and have businesses or enough wealth where they want to keep it going without fighting after they're no longer able to take care of it themselves. And there is a concept of a family council that is can work very well. Just as an example of that is Henry Ford created a family council, and they own the control the Ford Motor Company and have for the last 100 years. And that family council operates and meets regularly and is able to keep that company going and out of trouble. They didn't have financial trouble in 2008. They didn't run into trouble last year or any other time because they have a long-term plan and they plan to work as a family for many generations. Let's go on to page number 13, Israeli banking. There are alternatives to the 5 big banks. There are other smaller banks. I've given you the names of 2 of them. Both of those banks, Yahab and Otzar Achayel, are owned by larger banks, but the smaller banks are more personal. They may not work well for recent Olim because there's less of a chance that your local branch will have an English or a French speaker, etc. Okay, but on the other hand, if you're looking for something that works well, you may want to go to an internet bank, and a subsidiary of Bank Leumi exists, and that's called Pepper Bank. That gives you just about everything you have at Bank Leumi, but it doesn't operate any branches. And in terms of retail banking, the largest bank in the country is the Postal Bank. And it has a branch in every post office, plus it has a fairly good online presence. So those are alternatives. The main thing is that these other banks generally will provide good or better service, particularly if you're a Hebrew speaker, and they're less costly. If you are somebody who has some significant net worth, there is private banking in Israel that works much like Swiss banking does all over the world. And the big 5 banks each have private banking department, plus the Bank Yerushalayim specializes in that. And it's something you might want to look at in terms of getting a high level of personal service and having your own banker. In terms of investing in Israel can be done through it's most commonly done via the banks. However, there are private brokers, the biggest one being Maytab Dash, and then there are through the banks.
Mark, we're not hearing you, Mark.
Seems to be frozen.
Mark, are you muted?
No,
No.
something froze with
Frozen.
his
We
internet.
don't hear anything either.
Let me try to find out what's the problem.
Okay. It's not through us, is it?
Just a
Is
moment.
it only Mark that's frozen?
I think so. Hold a moment. Let me find out what the problem is.
Yeah,
This is Martin speaking. Can you hear me?
yes, Mark.
Okay. Let me, while we're trying to get Mark back, let me just say a word about Israeli banking. With all the money laundering laws and the United States becoming the father of all transactions, the banks have taken on a regulatory responsibility. And they've taken it on with a very heavy-handed and almost gleeful approach, which is that they are now trying to make you justify every transaction. So when you go in and you ask for more than a couple of thousand shekels from your
You're unmuted.
they'll say that it's more.
Okay. Yeah, by the way, Martin, are you able to put on your video?
Leah has the slides, and if we can move forward to 14.
Hang on, Martin was in the middle of explaining
Okay.
about the banks.
Right.
So, yeah, so I'm just saying that they want you to justify everything you withdraw and also everything you deposit. In other words, where's it coming from? Why did you have it? Who's giving it to you? Why, and so forth and so on. And they ask for all kinds of things in documentation. Now, you should know that by law, their responsibility is just to record what you say. So that if you say, "Well, I got this money because I was walking along the street and found it in the trash," that's what they should record. But they've taken on the paterfamilias role of trying to justify it and make sure that it's right and so forth and so on. So the relationship between a client and a bank has now become fairly antagonistic throughout Israel. Mark, back to you.
Okay, well, just to follow on what you were saying, that's why the AACI is associated with ISRA transfer, which goes and helps reduce the paperwork that's needed for transferring money in and out of Israel. We're not talking about $100 and $300. I think they start at $5,000 or $10,000 transfers before they're willing to help you because there are costs involved. Okay, Leah, have you been able to move it to page 14? No, not hearing anything. There we go. Okay. So what, I asked you to move it to 14, but on the previous page, there's one thing I forgot to put onto the slide. And that's known as Tofes Arichut Yamim. This in Israel is something that was a problem. It, for the most part, no longer is a problem, but it's worth explaining for everyone. The concept of a joint account between husband and wife or parent and child in Israel doesn't work the same way as it does in other Western countries like the UK, Australia, or Canada. In Israel, if a person dies and is a part owner of an account, he's considered a partner in the account. It's not joint ownership. And as a result, the bank is generally going to wait until there is a court order that clears how the partnership moves forward. And as a result, without a Tofes Arichut Yamim, which is the Israeli attempt to go and give joint tenant rights to couples and their children, their accounts can be impounded. So it's worth checking with your bank if you have a joint account, just to be double sure that the Tofes Arichut Yamim is in existence on your account. Okay, getting to Israeli charge cards. Banks in Israel particularly, but all over the world, are not social service agencies. Many people seem to be surprised by that. In other words, they're a business and their goal is to make money. And they're going to try to find ways to make money as often as possible. And one of the ways is to charge you a monthly fee for a charge card. The banks will give you a charge card at no cost if you insist on it and say you just need it for local purchases and that's it. And it's the same card, but it's not costing you 15 shekel or more per month. So try to get the free one if possible. Make sure they take the old one off the books because they will want to keep it on the books and find excuses why it should continue. And the one good thing about the charge cards in Israel is that you should put all your automatic charges on. There's two ways to go and have your water bill, your electricity bill, your cell phone bill, and all those monthly bills automatically paid. One is through your bank account. The second way is through the charge card. The charge card is cheaper. By having all your Horot Keva on your bank bill means that you probably will have monthly fees that will increase in terms of the cost of operating the bank account, while having additional things added to the bill at the charge card doesn't cost you per line item. One of the things that is available here in Israel is extremely common. Most of you know about it, but the newcomers might not, is that charges in Israel are not done on a credit system at the credit card company, but they're done by the seller. So if you're buying a washing machine, you're buying a new car or whatever, you can tell them to spread the payments over 12 months and maybe even more, sometimes without interest, sometimes with interest. And one of the things that I find terribly disturbing is every time you use the credit card in the supermarket, they ask you if you want tashlumim, meaning to spread it out over time. I think that if people have to spread out their food costs over time, it means that they're in deep trouble or they're going to get themselves into deep trouble. Okay, let's go on to the next page, number 15. has a simple shekel money management system. This was explained in a previous seminar we did at Zoom. But if anybody wants it explained in greater detail, I'll be happy to do so during the question and answer session. It's a way that you can automatically have all your bills paid every month, and you know in advance that everything's taken care of, particularly if you're in declining health or regularly traveling. This is a system that your money is managed for you without a great deal of cost. In fact, there's usually none, and that life works automatically without you having to worry about the bills every month. Okay, let's go on to page 16. The United States has a cash management system, which for non-Americans, even Canadians, turns out to be revolutionary. We're very much involved with it here. We'll be sending you more information about it, but it's especially important for people who have assets abroad and need to start consolidating everything in one place so that it works as automatically as possible. We'll be sending you more information. I'm not going to waste your time on it right now so we can get to the questions, but we feel that this is a really important tool. I can tell you that for the Israeli cash management system with Moshe Yonas, we have people who've been doing it with him for over 25 years without any complaints. Don't think about it the second time. We have people from many countries in the world who are doing it now through the American cash management system, and it's something that's worth looking into, and we'll send you more information. It also allows you, if you're traveling regularly, so that you have an account that is an international bank account, because you're going to be able to take cash out of cash machines at the middle rate instead of having to use money changers, etc. And you're able to have great flexibility. Okay, let's go to the final or almost final page of this slide pack, number 17. Is just a couple of points about what we do. We're not managing your money. We have a family office approach. We're trying to work with people to help them find the best managers, to find solutions to their financial issues, whether it's with insurances, accounting, tax preparation, etc. And we believe that we can provide a better service than the person who says, I'm a financial planner and my main goal is to get you to go invest through my brokerage system. What we do, we know is unique. There is no one else in Israel, to the best of our knowledge, that is helping people look at the big picture and then help them find the best providers for each of their financial needs. In general, people are going to banks, they're going to investment managers, or insurance companies to do their investing. Here in Israel, those are the three choices. Those are the main choices in England and Australia, New Zealand, and every place else. But trying to figure out what your needs are and then figuring out which system works best for you and who is able to get you good, reliable returns is what is our forte. And Yitzchak will be able to tell you more about that as well. So we work with many managers in different areas of investing, like real estate and securities, insurances, etc. in several countries. We're not limited to what goes on here. And the final slide is just to let you know who we are and how to contact us. And I think that finishes it for me. Yitzchak, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mark. You raised a lot of good questions. We're actually I guess halfway through the seminar. We still have our two other guests, and we have a lot of questions from the participants, which I'll make sure hopefully we'll be able to get to in time. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Martin Feder, who's an Israeli attorney and actually specializes in elder law and related areas. So I'll let him introduce himself and tell a bit about himself. Martin. Martin.
Martin, we've lost him.
I see him. Get
Maybe
ready.
he needs to be unmuted.
No.
Oh, now he's coming back.
Okay, there we go. Yes, I want to apologize.
Here's Martin. Martin,
Thank
it's all yours. You have a few minutes to introduce yourself, and then we're going to field some questions that our participants have been asking.
Okay. First of all, let me apologize for being blacked out most of the early part here. I'm sort of attending a Achnasat Sefer Torah, which popped up unexpectedly, and I'm sitting here looking at the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. So trying to do this, not give it the proper attention that it deserves. I've been here since the beginning. So as you know, I just want to make a couple of comments to add on to what Mark said, and then go to the questions, because unlike Mark, I understand this evening is not mainly about talking, but it's about fielding your questions and answering some of your concerns. I just want to separate things from before life, during life, and after life. The powers of attorney are valid, as Mark pointed out, mainly to help you deal with the situation where you are alive but can't deal with things on your own, whether that's mentally or physically. And there are three areas that the continuing power of attorney, but they're all powers of attorney. And as a matter of fact, everyone has to think about these three areas, whether you have a power of attorney or not. And you don't necessarily need one, but the three areas are: who's making health care decisions for you if you can't make them? If something needs what's called informed consent. Here in Israel, if anything is an emergency, it will be taken care of. You will not be allowed to die on the street. You will not be allowed to die if you come into the trauma unit in the hospital. Okay, and there's no such really a DNR, do not resuscitate, doesn't really exist in emergency situations. Okay, the default is that we go for life, and everything's set up to work that way. Okay, but if something that's a longer term kind of thing, dialysis, a feeding tube, where you have to give informed consent to have that used, if you can't do it, who's going to do it for you? As they used to say in America, who are you going to call? Well, Ghostbusters doesn't work. And here in Israel, no one has the power to make those decisions for you unless you've given them that power, okay, or by default, a council of doctors. And if you want someone who knows what your wishes are to make those decisions, you have to set it up in advance. The second thing is, where do you want to live and how do you want to live? Would you like, if you can't take care of yourself, do you want to be in a nursing home where everything's taken care of? Or would you want to have the trials and tribulations of trying to make it with a Filipino who only works 5 days a week? And then how's the family going to work the other 2 days and so forth? And the third question is the finances. Who's going to deal? Who's going to deal with your finances? Who has access to your money to pay for all this? Okay, that's while you're alive, in a nutshell. When you're dead, none of that matters. The real question is, how are your assets going to be distributed? And that's why you have a will. Why? Because you may not need a will. If you don't see any assets rolling around the streets because they've been unclaimed. That's because the government has set up a default. What happens to your assets if you haven't done a will? So it's not going to get lost, okay? But if you do have a will, then what will happen to your assets is what you want. Now you got to be careful here, because a will only applies to your estate. And if the questions come to that, back to the joint accounts and so forth and so on, the question of what is in your estate and what is not in your estate is very, very, very important, because your estate does not include all your assets. Not even all your assets in Israel. Forget about worldwide assets. Your estate will not include that. So the two things here, how do you set yourself up for when you can no longer take care of yourself on your own while you're alive? And then how do you make sure that to the best of your ability, most of your assets go the way that you want them to be distributed after you're no longer alive? Yitzchak, take it away.
Very good. Thank you very much, Martin. And other people, if you have your questions, you can keep on the chat, keep typing them in, and we're going to get to them all, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so briefly, let's introduce now. We've heard much about her already from Mark in different settings. Yanina works at the AACI. You're MSW. You're a counselor at AACI. Yanina Musnikow. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Close enough.
Close enough? Okay. But I don't get a cigar.
Okay. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Yanina. I'm the AACI counselor for most of the country. That does not include Jerusalem or the area surrounding Jerusalem. Sheila Bauman is the counselor for that area. Our job is to help our members navigate the systems in Israel, whether they're new Olim or whether they've been here for 30 years, and to also be advocates. And we are bilingual. I have an MSW, and I've been doing this for over 25 years.
Wow.
Okay?
Enough's enough. No.
And that's it.
Okay. So, all right. So people as well, is there anything you want to highlight that to stimulate ideas for people to be thinking of other questions that they may have?
What is important to understand is that a lot of the social assistance in Israel comes through Bituach Leumi, which is the national insurance plan.
Mm-hmm.
You do not need to pay someone to actually apply for any of the Bituach Leumi benefits. You can do it yourself. You can do it with a social worker, whether from the city or from AACI or from the Kupat Cholim, or you can do it with help from anyone who is bilingual.
Uh-huh. Okay. And bilingual, you don't mean English and French.
Right.
Okay. Very good. Okay. So more questions I see are coming in. All right, let's start with some of the questions. We only have a little over half an hour left for the questions. Some of them came in while Mark and others were talking, so I'm not sure if some of the questions were answered, but here's some that came in actually even before the seminar. I received many emails from people, never had that before, where people were already asking their questions before the seminar even began. So one of the questions says, one of my family members that I want to leave money to in my will is very irresponsible with finances. I was thinking of having part of the money I intend to leave him used when I pass away to buy an annuity where he would have a monthly income for life. I don't know about sales of these kinds of annuities in Israel. So the question is, are they reliable and who sells them? What about an annuity from an American company? Or another option they have is a trust, but I understand that's problematic as they heard again tonight. So you need to have someone you trust completely to manage it, etc. Any ideas? Who wants to take this one?
We're all silent. Martin, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, the answer, annuity is a nice idea. The question is who's running it. The banks are making it much more difficult to set up the kinds of trust accounts or a ne'emanut account that we used to set up in advance and put the money in there before death, or put a little bit in there to set it up so that upon death, the money can go right in there and start working. The only way now is to set it up in the will, and in addition to which, they will not allow anyone except an accountant or a lawyer to be the ne'eman, to be the trustee. I looked into options for other people recently, and no bank that I've found would allow a family member to be the trustee. So we're getting into really, crazy types of situations. The best, one of the ways around this is to give the money to a sibling who is a trusted sibling and give instructions. But you have to be careful not to cause family problems when you do this. An annuity outside of Israel sounds like it's an interesting idea. We haven't thought about that. As far as I know, I don't know how annuities work in Israel. You probably have to ask a stockbroker. I'm not familiar with that possibility.
No.
Okay,
very
so
good.
I'll continue on that one very quickly. From what I've heard in the past, there are no American European style annuities available from Israeli insurance companies. They are available in the United States and Canada. However, the only restriction that I've run into is that one needs to use an onshore address in the country where you're doing it. The address can be changed afterwards.
Okay. All right. So hopefully that answers that question. Another one. I'm the recipient, along with my two sisters, of my mother's house upon her passing away in the form of a life estate. We're in the process of selling it. I want to know if this is considered by Israeli law an inheritance. And when we sell it, will I be liable for capital gains tax only from the day of my mother's death, which is, I guess they're assuming is American law, or from the day it was registered to us as a life estate? There's a good question.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the concept of a life estate. That sounds like something that's an American law, and I'm only an Israeli lawyer. I will point out that the way inheritances work in Israel is different from the way they work in America, for instance. So that if you receive an asset, okay, in this case, and then you sell it, in other words, you were the titular owner of the asset, and then you sell it, then you have capital gains. But if it's the estate that sells the asset and then distributes it, in America, you reset the purchase value to the time of death, and therefore there's no capital gains, as long as it's done by the estate. In Israel, that's not the case because there is no estate as a separate entity in Israel, so that in theory, you get the asset. The exception being is if it's sold before outside of Israel, and then you get ownership of the money. So in other words, as an example, when my folks passed away, I have two sisters. I said to them, I don't want any stocks. Sell anything you're going to give to me. I want everything in cash, because I don't want there to be any capital gains tax in Israel, even if I turn around tomorrow and sell it.
Okay.
I'll just add a couple words so people understand better. In Israel, there's no estate or death taxes. And Israel keeps things real simple. And the way things are transferred is under the gift law. The gift law doesn't just cover estates with inheritances, but it is anytime someone gives you something, you get it initially tax-free, but because you're getting it tax-free, there is a tax on the other end when it's sold. And the tax on the other end is computed from the day it was originally bought by the person who gave you the gift.
But Mark, let me point out that that's not the case for real estate. Real estate is an exception. Real estate, if the gift law is not tax-free, there's mas rechisha and mas shevach. The only exception to that is inheritance. So if I want to give something to my son while I'm still alive, he has to pay the lower rate. He still has to pay mas rechisha, which is acquisition tax, and mas shevach, which is capital gains tax. Whereas if you wait until I die, you will get that same property totally tax-free.
Very good. All right, a couple of questions. A few people asked this, trying to get a clarification between the difference between the power of attorney and continuing power of attorney.
Yanina, I don't want to take all your steal all your thunder or take all your spotlight, but I guess it's another one over here.
Martin, I'm only here if there's something socially related. Go for it.
I am socially relating to you and trying to say, I want to include you in here. But okay. The power of attorney and continuing power, and what we call ongoing power of attorney. A regular power of attorney says, please go, and you have the right to go to let's take it as a bank, to my bank and take out money if I ask you to do so on my behalf. Okay. So you will go to the bank and you'll fill out the form with them and you have a power of attorney over the account. Okay. You can use this for other things as well in Israel. As Mark pointed out, the law is the power of attorney is an extension of your hand physically, so that if the person is demented or is no longer able to express his wishes, then I and the power of attorney holder have no right to touch anything in that account. So if the bank doesn't know about it, can I do it? Yes, of course. If I'm a family member and no one else complains about it, can I do it? Yes. If I'm a lawyer, I should know better, and I can't do it. Okay. Now that's a regular power of attorney. In 2017, the Justice Ministry in Israel, with a committee. Now we all know that committees want to put together a horse and come out with a camel, and they put together something called the.
We lost you, Martin.
He muted.
Described before. Very complicated, very powerful. It's the first time anybody can tell a bank to do something and the bank can't say no. As a matter of fact, the Justice Ministry and the Bank of Israel are fighting with the banks now about implementing it because the banks are so stuck with saying no to everything that they've said no to powers of attorney. And the Bank of Israel and the Justice Ministry are now issuing regulations to the banks on how to facilitate the people to whom the powers have been given to actually have them run the accounts. Okay. It is a power that deals with all three separate issues I talked about earlier: health, quality of life, and finances. It's like going to a smorgasbord at a wedding. There are endless things on the table and you have to pick what you want and how it's to be applied. So you can really tailor this to your desires. Two things to watch out for. One is you should appoint people whom you trust and who are capable and who are willing, because if someone has to start dealing with your affairs, they can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy doing it. For practical reasons, for all practical purposes, lawyers who are setting this up cannot become the people who are actually executing it later on. It limited us to 3, so the 3 power people, so we can't make a business out of this. Okay, and they've also, pardon me, we've also been careful about making sure that the people to whom you give the power know you well enough to know what you really would have wanted, so that you're transferring the power and continuing the quality of your life and the quality of the decisions in the same way that you wanted to have them happen all along.
Okay, one other thing to add is for people who don't have money, but still want to make sure that their wishes as far as what happens to them when they're too ill in the last 6 months or so of their life are honored. They can do the advanced medical directive, which Mark mentioned earlier. It's through the Ministry of Health. It is free, and it can be done with assistance from a nurse or doctor from your kupa.
But that only covers the healthcare
medical
aspect. It does not cover the quality of life nor the finances.
No, only medical.
Okay, very good. All right.
Israeli law, which means you have to be apprentice every 5 years. And we know that people, as they decline, arrive at a point just when they need it, that they can't renew it again. So it's used as an expression of desires, but it's not binding, because it usually when it comes, when it's needed, it's no longer binding because it has expired.
No, I have some people that actually, it's okay.
They've been lucky. They've been lucky
Okay.
because the committee of doctors to declare that you only have 6 months or less left to live while it's still valid.
Right.
Okay. A related question, so I'll just jump to that now. Is there a list of lawyers, hopefully even by geographic area, who are authorized to make a continuing power of attorney? Can the AACI or others make recommendations?
You can't make, I don't think you can make recommendations. There are lists. There are huge numbers actually in these lists in the Bar Association website.
Okay, in the bar website.
Bar Association. I think RBA.co.il or something like that. A list of people. You can call. You should be able to call any lawyer, and if he doesn't, he should be able to give you a recommendation to somebody who is authorized. There are many people who've authorized.
I think what they're meaning recommended means somebody who's used them and can refer them. Give a
Probably somebody they
recommendation.
know, somebody who they know, and so forth and so on. It's expensive. It's complicated because of all the choices, and it also takes a lot of time because it has to be done online. And I won't say half the time, but a lot of times the site drops and you got to start all over again. It costs much more than it should. And they're working on other things, unfortunately, not on getting the time and the cost down. One of these days they might do that, but that's because they work in committee.
Okay, related to power of attorney, a question came up also. Can one have a power of attorney in the US and a different one in Israel?
The ongoing power of attorney is not valid outside of Israel. It's an Israeli law dealing with Israeli institutions. Okay, so yes, of course, you can have all kinds of powers of attorney under local law anywhere else. And you can have a regular power of attorney under Israeli law. But powers of attorney are jurisdictional, meaning that they only will apply in the jurisdiction to which the law that forms them is applicable.
Okay, just seeing if they're adding.
Wills, on the other hand, that's the total opposite. A will, once it's made, is valid until it's revoked or changed, and it's valid anywhere, and it's valid forever.
Okay, so here's a will question. I'm not sure if is there a simple standard will whereby my wife and I can inherit one another when one of us passes before the other?
No, both of you have to do a will. There is something called a tzava'ah adadit in Israel, sort of, where the husband says, I give you everything, my dear, and if you're not alive anymore, it goes to the kids, and she says the same thing. It doesn't solve anything. It makes it more difficult for the remaining person to change their will, but it doesn't solve anything because the after the first person dies, the second person can use all the money any way he sees fit until he dies or she dies. So it doesn't really solve anything. But no, each person has to do the minimum of their will. Now, again, as I said, the default is not such a terrible thing. The default is half of what is in the estate. The Israeli law default is half of what is in the estate of the person who's deceased goes to the surviving spouse, if there is any, and the other half goes to all the children in equal amounts, or their survivors. Okay, and if the spouse is no longer alive, then all of it goes to the children in equal amounts. So if that's what you want, you don't need to do a will.
Okay. Another question: if you and your wife have a joint account, how can the spouse have access to the account when their spouse dies?
Well, the first thing is that you probably shouldn't have everything in a joint account. In general, for many, many reasons, having everything in a joint account with your wife or with your husband is never a good idea. Anyway, but assuming that you do have a portion of your amount in the joint account, as Mark mentioned, upon death, all of a sudden, the account is considered to be half-half. So the bank now acting as in loco parentis, in place of the parent, now says, okay, we'll allow you to continue to use your account for the same types of things you were using it for before, okay? But you can't clear it out. It doesn't belong to you entirely. you have to get an inheritance order or an order that upholds the will before we will give you the other person's share, quote unquote. Even though a joint account by law and under the Bank of Israel law, officially, each shekel belongs in entirety to both parties. What happens is that sometimes the banks have given money without being careful about to whom they gave it, and so they're covering their rear ends, and they don't want to allow anything possibly wrong to happen, so they freeze the account. Or in the case where you do have a schema where it is a joint account with right of survivorship, then they only freeze half. It's terrible for us. I mean, it's good for us lawyers. I just spent 2 cases, going back 2 or 3 generations, to have the court issue inheritance orders so that the person can get the money out of the joint account.
Really, it took that long. But
The mother died, and the mother had it together with the sister, and the brother was in America, and the brother died. Okay, so half of the mother went to the brother, and half the brother went to the mother. And now who's getting the money in the account it's a joint account between the mother and the sister. And the brother's no longer here and had no survivors. Okay. And you probate the will for the mother, and then probate the will for the brother, and then get them to agree that the brother's section has to go to the sister. It's a ball of wax.
I hear. Okay, a private banking question. What sum of money is necessary for an account? I don't know if that's a Mark question.
Mark.
It all depends on the bank. In terms of Israel, it's an institution. The person here is talking about having a private bank account. I would doubt that any of the private banks are going to look at you seriously for less than $500,000, and it might be much higher than that.
Dollars or shekels?
On the investing side,
Dollars or shekels?
dollars. On the investing side, in order to get from an Israeli institution some private help that is serious help, it's generally $500,000 shekels.
Shekel.
Shekels, yeah. Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. By the way, someone else typed in, most banks, he says, don't allow arichas yamin.
Not true.
Oh, the opposite.
So you tell them.
The
Right
default should be arichas yamin, and if you don't have it, you can ask the bank to do it on an old account.
Can you hear that? Okay, I think there was actually 2 people that talked about that. So most banks, they said don't allow you, so they do allow, and you can insist on it. Okay, if there's any other question, we still have 15 minutes left. I think we've hit all the questions, unless we want to open up again to Mark or to Martin or Yanina.
Yitzchak, I didn't hear you. Can you say it again, please?
I said, whatever, if you have any points that we haven't yet touched on, there are no more questions at this point. So for Mark or Yanina or yourself, if you have any other points you wanted to make, we have a little less than 15 minutes if we want to use it. Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you.
There was a couple of things that Mark went through the PowerPoint that came to mind. But I don't have it in my
what was the topic?
Yes. Tofes or Eskem Arichut Yamim is only for joint accounts. Now that's not only a joint account between spouses, right? What's the plural of a spouse? Spice. Okay, so it's not only joint account, but any joint account. You can do a Tofes Arichut Yamim between a mother and a daughter. You can do whatever you want. All it means is the right of joint survivorship. And practically, it doesn't have very much meaning, because if you don't have it, the bank will freeze the entire account. And if you do have it, the bank will freeze half the account. Isn't that? The question that came across here, what is the difference between an estate and all your assets? Well, let's answer the question. What is in your estate what assets are in your estate and what assets are outside your estate. Okay. The first thing we take out of the estate is anything that has a beneficiary. So if it's a Kupat Gemel, Pensia, Keren Ishtalmut, or life insurance plans, where there's a designated beneficiary, then that will not be in your estate, or in Israel either. Okay, that is not controlled, doesn't go to the people specified in your will. It goes to the people you named as your beneficiaries. So it is important when you review your will, okay, that you also go through the accounts that have beneficiaries and look and talk to the people, to the companies, and see who are the beneficiaries you designated 37 years ago when you first started the account. I mean, one of my colleagues said the worst thing he ever had to do was to tell the wife that the $500,000 life insurance policy was going to the first wife because the husband had never changed it. And these, as I said, these are things that are not covered by wills. The other thing is you have to be careful and figure out what is in a person's estate. Let me give you an example, right? You have a joint account and you have a house that's in both of your names, okay? And your wife has a house that's fully under her name, okay? And the wife dies. First thing, is her house totally hers? Or since you've been living together for 40 years, have you also acquired a half interest in this house just by living together? The court has to decide, okay? Secondly, the house that is half-half and the bank account that's half-half, that means that what's in the estate is half the house. So if there's no will and we take the default, right? So of the half of the house that's in the will, half of that will go to the surviving husband, okay? So he will end up with a quarter of the house, plus the half that he already owns. And the children will get to divide the remaining quarter. It's a little bit complicated, you have to think about it. The same would be true for the joint account, right? The husband will end up with 3/4 and the children will divide a quarter amongst themselves. And it only gets more complicated from here. So I will stop right there.
Okay, very good. And I would say that the guy who told his wife that the $500,000 policy was in the first wife's name, he didn't need a will. He probably needed life insurance. Anyways,
A little bit late for it.
in any event, we have a few more questions here. Okay. The Tofes Arichas Yamim, is it only for joint accounts?
Yeah, so I just want to say, we say that where there's a will, there are three things. Where there's a will, there's a way. Where
And a
there's a
lawyer.
relative, and where there's a will, there's a lawyer.
There you go. Very good. So you got it covered. So Tofes Arichas Yamim, is it only for joint accounts?
Yes, it's called Heskem Arichut Yamim, and it's only for joint accounts.
Okay.
The American terminology is right of joint survivorship.
Okay, so here's another question. We've made a will. Does Israeli law interfere with the American will to make it comply with Israeli law if we don't make an Israeli will?
Yeah, well, the answer to that is there is no a will is a will. Okay, there is no will under Israeli law. Okay, Israeli law says there's no inheritance tax. Israeli law says we can uphold the will if there's no pressure or untoward finagling in making the will. But if it's a valid will, you don't have to, it doesn't have to conform to Israeli law. I mean, Israeli law is like every other will law. A will is a will.
Okay. Okay, in the remaining few minutes, Yanina, is there any other points you would like to make? And then Mark, in closing, other comments as well? Let's go first to Yanina.
Yanina's first point, I want to apologize for monopolizing based on the questions. So Yanina, apologies.
No apology necessary. I think most of our people want to hear about legal and financial issues. I was just here as backup. What somebody did ask was the question about Bituach Leumi. And basically, just so people know, for the most part, Bituach Leumi offers a pension to people who make Aliyah before the age of 62. They offer a special old age allowance for people who do not have a lot of finances. In other words, they don't have a lot of money, income. There is also monies to help pay for a carer. If you need a carer and you fulfill all the rights and all the things that you need so that you're eligible for a carer, Bituach Leumi will help pay for a carer. They do not pay for a live-in carer in its entirety. And anyone who has any of these kinds of issues is welcome to contact me.
Okay, very good. And we'll
One thing I might add to that is that lawyers can also do things for you with Bituach Leumi, but that costs money, unlike everything that Yanina said before. The only good part is that we are limited by law as to how much we can take. It's something on the order of 10, 11, 12% of what we obtain for you. So it's not, you cannot come with a fee, and plus a dossier fee, an opening fee. So the lawyers cannot come and take 50% of what they get for you. It's not an open market. The Bituach Leumi law limits to a relatively reasonable fee what it is that lawyers can take for their services.
Good to know.
very good. Okay, Mark, any closing comments?
Well, instead of a closing comment, I just want to relate and maybe get some reaction from Yanina. Yanina really encouraged that we do this evening because she had some very strong feelings and has had some outstanding cases that she felt people should be prepared for so they don't land on her desk. Some people get themselves into trouble without realizing it. I'm just wondering if Yanina wants to give us one or two war stories or some of the things that she wants to make sure that everyone avoids.
One of the things that we always want people to do is to do your homework. Check as much as you can with whatever information is out there in English. If it's a case of Bituach Leumi, their website is in English. There is a lot of information out there. Do not assume that you have to pay someone in order to apply for something and to receive something. As far as financial issues, it is very important. Mark said I made him put it in. It is very important that you leave your affairs in order, not a bunch of shopping bags full of loose paper that somebody has to go through. Find someone, if you can, in your family who is probably going to be around a lot longer than you, and work together to show them what assets you do have, where your will is, what your desires are. The same with medical. Even though it may be a good thing to have an enduring or an ongoing power of attorney or an advanced medical directive, it's also true that very often, even when you're okay, but you're not feeling well and you're a little wobbly, that if you take someone with you to the doctor or to the emergency room or to the hospital, they will be able to talk for you. The doctors will listen. It is true that the advanced medical directive, it was hard to get the medical community in Israel to follow people's wishes. The default is to keep someone alive no matter what. That I do believe is still the default in Israel. which is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so however, if you don't want the default, today, when you do the advanced medical directive and you send it to the Ministry of Health, they will send back a card and you keep that card in your wallet. And if you turn up in emergency room, there's a better chance that somebody's going to find it. But again, let your family know what you want because they can advocate for you.
Very nice. Okay, it brings us to the close. Thank you very much, Yanina, and to Martin, Mark, Leah, Janice at AACI, and to all our participants for having joined us. A lot of material will be coming out of the Financial Resource Network offices in the next few days, and a recording of the session. If you want to receive it, we'll be sending it out, and I'll be in touch with each participant. If you have other questions, we can follow up individually. Thank you all so much, and we wish you all a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all as well from AACI. Okay.
זהו?
Right, I'm ending the meeting. Okay.
Good night. Thank you for your help.
Yeah, it's okay. Thanks. Thank your daughter as well. She was great.
Okay,
Leah. Okay. Bye for now. Thanks.
bye.